This week on Hill Country Networks, we're starting out the show with a little bit of baseball. We're out here at the Cotton State Baseball League, and we're excited about coming out and showing you different places each week for different players. We'll be having some interviews later on, and we'll be following them during the season and bringing them some update scores. And we are looking forward to being involved with the Cotton State Baseball League, who is in their 11th season this year. Guys are getting set up.
Leading off for the Thunders, we go to the top of the third.
Thunders in white.
State University catcher, number 29, Casey Filligan.
And the green is the Jets. And this is the first game of the day. We're going to have a second game at 4 o'clock. There's another game going on right now on another field. School's out now. Hill Country Happenings will be bringing you candidate speaking and also the baseball. We're going to have some different interesting things going on. This week we lost several people that passed away. One of them was Senator Thad Cochran, who has served 45 years in Congress. And another one was a local person that supported the arts and different community events, Mr. Bill Smallwood. They'll both be sorely missed. There are others, and you can find our obituaries on our website at www.hillcountrynetwork.net. We hope you'll stay tuned for the rest of the show, and we hope you have a wonderful week.
Leave that back to lights on. So we've got a little age on our projector here, and so it's a little bit dim, but I've run through it. I think you'll be able to see everything okay. And after we do this first part, it's good. Okay, it's a good group here. I'm going to ask folks to gather around a map, but we can shift around later. My name is Bob Barber, and thank y'all for coming. This is the first in a series of area meetings we're having around and throughout the city over the next couple of days. And so we'll test out what we're doing on you all tonight and perhaps perfect it for the other meetings. So thank you for letting us do that. So what we're doing is we're essentially gathering input and listening to the city of New Albany, whoever wants to participate in the planning process. The process that we're going through is called New Albany Next. And it is a process of looking at the future of New Albany over the next 20 years. And the next hour and 15 minutes or so, we're going to interact with you. We're not going to interact with you that whole time. I'm going to give you some background information. And then after the background information, we've got a series of questions. We're trying to have a conversation about New Albany. Your thoughts, your perceptions about the city from a variety of perspectives and how you see it progressing over the next 20 years. And we'll get to that point at the end. So my intention is to, or our intention is to engage you so that we understand, this is we're at the very initial stages of this process. When we get into it more, we will have good, solid, quality input into what's going on. So, thank you for coming. You got notice of the meeting some way, either via the newspapers or social media. Appreciate you responding to it. We always kind of want to figure a way to open the conversation well and get people kind of accustomed to what we're doing here. And the way I like to do it is just illustrate a few historic photos of the community. And these are just a few just to get you to think about. These are from what's called the Cooper Postcard Collection. Welcome, come on in. Cooper Postcard Collection. They were taken around the turn of the century just after. This is a bird's eye view of New Albany, about 1910 or somewhere right there. I was trying to figure out what perspective that was taken from, but we couldn't really do it. Here's downtown New Albany, back in the day. You'll see the wagons and the muddy street. This is out of the top of the courthouse, looking into downtown. And I believe that building may still be there, right? Several of those buildings are. You'll see that. And then here's Church Street looking east. And I can't place Church Street, right? Point in the direction of Church Street, right back here. Is that right back there? Okay. Church Street looking east. Interesting guy there on a mule, and you'll see the street scene, the sidewalks, the street trees, and so forth. There's another one. I believe that's the Rainy. There. There's a train coming over the river there, and I had to throw a couple of other interesting shots. This is a baptism. They're baptizing in somebody's pond there. And this is the inside of Rogers Pharmacy, I think. Just thinking, setting the stage, thinking about New Albany. And when you look at those pictures, you can understand very quickly, you get a historic perspective, that the city is going to change. It's going to change over the next 20 years. And it's going to change regardless of what New Albany says or does. It will change. So the question we pose when we enter into a planning process is, would you like to influence that change, or will you simply be subject to whatever change may come down the road? Now obviously the city has already answered it would like to have some influence on the future as it goes forward. So that is the project we have, New Albany Next. It's a comprehensive planning project. It will involve projecting and describing the future aspirations of New Albany. And it will involve also designing in a hard physical kind of way key components and elements that the city would aspire to as time goes on. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's a way to do that. Now what it does is this: a plan forms the basis for how the city codes itself, zoning codes, development policies. Now, integral to what we're doing is good, solid, frank, positive, and productive discussion about the future of the city, and we'll get to that. Another major idea that we approach, cities have, any community has life cycles, just like people. And any part of the city may have its own little micro life cycle. So the cities grow, they're born, they grow, they plateau, and they will decline, and they will severely decline. But there are points at which you can intervene in a decline with certain ways to prolong growth or to regenerate growth over time. So there's a life cycle aspect to what goes on. You see it in your town, as we've seen the downtown. I'm sure some of you, I'm sure, have seen it go down, and now there's kind of a rebirth down there. A couple of ideas there, and then the final one is this. When we think about a community, and you're going to be thinking about it somewhat this way tonight, we utilize this technique. This is called a planning continuum. So that if I'm driving into New Albany from your town, Union Center, or your area, I'm going to come in a rural area, country area, and then I'm going to hit a suburban houses become more dense, and the closer I drive, then I get into commercial areas, urban, built-up areas, all the way on down till we get to kind of the heart of the community, which is downtown New Albany. So that's called a transect or a continuum. We use this to frame up how we think about the city as it goes forward. This is 2 more slides, and then I'm going to jump into the background information. This is the process that we use. We're right here now. We're in 1 and 2, okay? Discovery is some of the information that I'm about to cover. Direction is where we begin to hear the direction and aspiration that you all have for New Albany as we go forward. Then as we move on out, we actually generate a plan, and then we move forward into a fundamental part of it at the end is how do you implement the plan? What are the mechanisms to do that? New Albany, in the discovery process, we do analysis. We analyze economy, demographics, land use maps back there. We calculate, we come up with factual, what are the facts about the city, understanding the dynamics of it. So I'm just going to, this is not about all of it, and we're still in this process. I'm going to just hit a few as we go along. Number 1 is the natural environment. This is the Tallahatchie River. Runs right down. It essentially divides the city. This is old New Albany over here with downtown in this area, and this is the Walmart area out here. So this very unique natural environment of New Albany. So we take a look at that, the watershed, water flows, how it impacts water quality, etc. In terms of population growth, the city, this slide shows since 1990. This is Union County. Relatively small as county goes in terms of population. Has grown substantially over the last since 1990. And this is New Albany's growth from 1990 at 6,600, steadily growing, 87, 57. And continuing to slowly grow. Now, a lot of communities in our state can't say that. They're not growing. They're stagnated. Not so in the case of New Albany. When you look at the components of the actual population, this is what's called a population pyramid. These are the old folks here. This is New Albany's population. These are the young folks, 0 to 4 here. When you see a community that has a population pyramid with a slope like this, you see, that immediately says health, vitality. There's young people, there are more young people than old people. it's a very healthy kind of way of looking at the community. Now that's projected to continue over time. A lot of communities don't have that kind of projection. They have a aging, your population will age, but they show a much greater increase in aging population. Now, employment, I'm not going to dwell on any of these, but manufacturing plays a huge role in New Albany, as well as educational, healthcare, social services. So those are the two dominant employers. Pretty good professional population, a lot of retail trade. This is the distribution of the way folks earn their living in New Albany. When we look at income distribution, this is another, speaks to the health of the community. This is income group from $50,000 to $75,000. The dominant income group, a very solid middle income kind of community. This is a good thing, and here's another interesting statistic we pulled. The poverty rate in New Albany has declined in the last 7 years by nearly 4%. It's a rather remarkable thing. In challenging times, you've had a decline in poverty. It speaks to the health of the economy. This slide will show folks coming into Union County to work, working in Union County, and leaving Union County to work. And you see the numbers. 5,000 folks come in, 1,000 live here and work here, 2,200 leave. I expected to see something different. I thought a lot more people would be leaving the area to work and go to jobs.
Is that the city or the county?
That's the county as a whole. County as a whole. Just a couple of words about housing. And we're just in the initial stages of the housing analysis. If you can see this slide, the green dots represent home owners. The red dots represent renters. And we just try to get a sense of tenure. Now, each dot doesn't necessarily represent a specific home. The slide is intended to illustrate the density of the characteristics, or the concentration of it. So what the slide says, this is Interstate 22. This is the river. A lot of home ownership concentrated in this area. A lot of home ownership out on the northwest side of town. A lot of renters back in this area back here where there's older housing. And kind of half and half up here in the Glenfield area. So we get a sense of, you know, when you look at a community and you see excessive amount of rental units, you have to wonder what's going on in that community, and it impacts the way people are connected to the community. When you see no rental units, you have to wonder the community is not accommodating all the folks it needs to service the economy. So in this instance, your home ownership versus rental is about 60-40, roughly 60-40, which is a fairly healthy rate. So my thing just quit. Does yours have? Did you have one?
I don't.
Okay, I'll have to point it. So that's what this indicates. This is the number of renters, number of owners. This is the age of the housing stock. This lot of homes built from, this is from 39 to 79. Less built more recently, and we will look at that, analyze it from, you know, need for new construction or possibilities, or what's going to happen in terms of rehabbing homes and that sort of thing. That is that's the mobility characteristics of New Albany. I won't dwell on that, except to say that increasing traffic here. This is up by the hospital. Not increasing traffic up here. More going on down, and actual traffic declines as we get down into the downtown We examine the street patterns, the road patterns, and how that lays out in terms of mobility. But also the uniqueness in New Albany and your mobility is Tanglefoot, which in many ways has put New Albany on the map. It's just amazing to me. The folks who, when we travel, they've heard of Tanglefoot. Some have even been and biked and utilized Tanglefoot. So you have that aspect, the non-motorized part of mobility that we want to look at as well. I threw this slide in here just to show you, this is an MDOT project that's being evaluated for the intersection at 30 and 22 up here by the hospital. Potential of relieving some of that. This is the roundabout option. You see multiple roundabouts. This is the signalized option. And I don't think I think that's under discussion by city and MDOT and others. And this process may have some influence over which one of those options is chosen. Finally, the last few slides. This is development patterns in New Albany. Everything in red is commercial. Everything in a yellow, which you can't really see the yellow on this projector, is residential. This is the Walmart area. The blue areas are public areas, schools, and so forth. Here's the park. Here's the park by the river, B&A Park here. So we examine that in terms of land use. One thing about New Albany, there is lots of available land in the community. If this were a hypothetical acre in New Albany, 1 acre of ground, and we put that distribution of development on it, this is right of way, this is agriculture, forest, large lot, all the way down to the downtown area. So lots of open areas. Having available land for development is not really a concern for the city. New Albany has some very unique components, and we're discovering them, and you already know them. You can help us discover them better. But these are some just quick observations, and they're not by any means all of them. There's a downtown like no other. You literally have a downtown like no other. There's no other community that comes to mind that we've worked in that has solved a parking issue organically by parking down that center lane. Now, I've noticed that MDOT or somebody's trying to stop you from doing that because they painted a center line down there, and I'm assuming. But it's unique. It makes your town charm. Then you've got a trailhead to one of the best trails around, right up in the center of that. It's a very unique situation. And when my partners come in, we'll all be back in for planning week in July. I mean, there's a couple of them already been here, and it's just, wow. Anyway, very unique. The riverfront adds to that. That riverfront is interesting. Right there at downtown, adds to the uniqueness of New Albany. The park by the river and the other parks as well, but particularly that one, and the level of recreational resources available in the community. Strong cultural assets. I can just tell you, when we come into the community and we begin to see quilt trails and markers of special places and hand-painted art out here and there, when that and then when you got a history museum, and then I noticed a dinner theater the other night, and we came over to your book fair, your literary competition last fall because Richard Grant was here with dispatches from Pluto. Anyway, that kind of stuff in a community of 8,000 is a rather remarkable thing from observation. You got growth prospects, you got strong community anchors, and I skipped this bifurcated city. I mean, very unique geography to have the river split the community and kind of old town and another town. What happens over time? What if you grow by 2,000 people? Do they grow there? Do you build neighborhoods there? Of course, the market's going to determine some of that, but what are the implications over time? Next.
We're delighted tonight to have our three speakers. We've got Buck Clark, running for treasurer. Jeremy Martin, where'd you go? There you are. Okay. Candidate for transportation commissioner. And Michael Watson for Secretary of State.
Thank y'all. I am Buck Clark, and Dr. Hill has actually known me longer than my wife. He was my personal physician. He and Jean Hill were in Hollandale, and he was telling Elizabeth about me getting knocked out in a high school football game one night, and said he hadn't been the same since. And that was 45 years ago, I think, is when that happened. Buck Clark, I'm from Hollandale. I'm a CPA by trade, been in public accounting for the last 40 years. And the other 40-year anniversary is Paula and I have been married 40 years. We had our anniversary just last week. And she is my favorite campaigner. I like to take her to the women's groups. We have 3 grown children. Our youngest just moved to Oxford. We're proud she moved back. Her husband's an ER physician. If you ever go to the ER in Oxford, you might run into my son-in-law. And they have 2 of our grandchildren. I have 2 other children. One's in Washington, D.C., who works for the U.S. Senate. He actually handles a whole lot more money than the state of Mississippi's budget. So try to get tips from him on that. Michael knows him, too. Then my other daughter is in Savannah, Georgia, and has a business, 2 children, and doing well. And they're all going to be in Hollandale this weekend. We haven't had them together in a while. I'm a Methodist. I lead the singing. When we started singing, I thought you were going to ask me to come up here and lead the singing. I lead the singing at the Methodist Church. Or I go audition for Grease even. Anyway, enjoy that at our local Methodist church. Been a Boy Scout master for 25 years, an Eagle Scout. And again, I've been in Hollandale my whole life. And before I get going any further, I want y'all to pray for the folks in the South Delta. You're not hearing a lot of that in the media, and there are a lot of political reasons, in my opinion, why you're not hearing a lot. Environmental groups who don't want the pumps, and I could stand up here for an hour and tell you all about the pumps, but just know there's still 250,000 acres underwater in the South Delta. These homes are flooded out. People aren't going to plant crops this year, and it's just devastating. And the water has actually come up just in the last week because you've had a rise in the river. And again, I could get into all where the different levees are, but please put those people on your prayer list because it's really not getting any better right now. I'm a graduate of Mississippi State, by the way. Had a degree in accounting from Mississippi State where I met Paula. I know, you got to do that. And my Mississippi State graduate child lives in Oxford. And I told the Oxford people, I said, I do have 3 hours from Ole Miss. But believe it or not, out of all my hours, I have 3 hours from Ole Miss and the rest are from Mississippi State. Just, I had to get a token or something. I am making a living at it, right. I want to talk to you just a little bit now about the Treasurer's Office, which is what I'm running for. And again, I got a CPA background, but the Treasurer's Office has 4 main functions. The first is protecting public dollars. The treasurer moves money around. As Margaret Rogers knows, you've got 110 agencies out there, and you're moving public dollars around. You're protecting those public dollars. So, you're making sure, especially public dollars in counties, that they have the proper collateral backing them up. It's a big process. It's an accounting process, and it's kind of what I've done for the last 40 years. I remember the story about Katrina. Tate Reeves' staff actually talks about during Katrina, which Senator Watson was in the throes of Katrina, that they had to actually haul generators upstairs at the treasurer's office to run the computers because all the electricity was out in Jackson. But they still needed to put money in proper places, like at MEMA, the National Guard. They had to have money in different places, and they took generators upstairs to run it and get that done. I'm going to look into that when I get elected treasurer and make sure we don't have to use generators again, that we have some type of emergency backup to that. But that's something very important. One of the second things the treasurer does is make sure the debt gets paid on time. We've got over $4 billion in our debt, and I will say that it hasn't really grown much since the Republicans have taken control in the last 8 years. I'm going to talk about Republican control in a minute too. But one of the main jobs of the treasurer is to see the debt gets paid on time. And also when we have a new bond issue, the treasurer is on what they call the bond commission, makes up 3 members of the bond commission, and votes after the legislature has sent this bonding over there. And it's tended to those new issues. You've got, again, to make sure the money gets put in the right place, and it's negotiating with the fees that all these people who are part of the bonding process might be paid. So it's a very important job of the treasurer to tend to all that. Another thing the treasurer does is tends to unclaimed property. Do y'all realize that every little bank in the state might have unclaimed property, like a bank account one of your uncles may have left, that nobody claims it for years, a dormant account? Well, it gets sent, and there's statutory, there's some state laws that say when it's proper that money gets sent, and the treasurer is in charge of taking care of that money. And every year it's millions of dollars come in to the state treasurer that's unclaimed property. Now, we don't just erase whose name it was in, because every year the state treasurer issues a list, goes around the state. You've probably seen Lynn Fitz, she may have been up here recently, trying to find people who own this money. And it's a process, and every year it's some great stories of people that do find a bank account. Sometimes it's $8, sometimes it's several $1,000s. But that's one of the jobs of the state treasurer, to tend to that. The other thing is the college savings plans. You've heard of the prepaid college plan. You've got the 521, 529 plan type thing, but the prepaid plan is really the more noticeable, and it's been in the news probably in the last few years more, and that's where you can, for your children or your grandchildren, you can lock in some cheap rates at Mississippi State right now. And or Southern Miss or Delta State. You could lock in some rates right now for years down the road, because tuition is inching up every year, and you're paying for it in advance, and the treasurer takes care of that account. Now, what's come out in recent years is that the thing may not be totally funded, and it's I'm going to talk about PERS in a minute, but it's I think they saw that it was like maybe 60-70% funded. And I'll tell you that many other states have dropped their prepaid tuition plans, because it is going to be guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the state of Mississippi. Whatever, if you signed up for it, you paid your money, whatever the amount of the county is, the legislature is going to see that you get paid. So there's no loss to any citizen. It would just be on the state, that it should be paid for. So it actually got closed a few years ago for a short time, and it opened back up. And it's just something I don't think we should kick the can down the road. It's something that we've got to take seriously. And if there needs to be another funding mechanism, or just, the actuaries look at this thing and decide what the plan what you should pay to get into the plan, we just got to be frank and look at the numbers. It's just math. It comes out to math eventually. Now, the unknown is how much is college tuition going to be in future years, because that gets into part of it also. And what are returns out there? You don't go gamble this money in the market, by the way. So you're not, if the stock market's going up 40%, you're not gambling that money. You've got to be safe. But that's something we can't kick down the road. And that leads me to get into another part of the treasurer's job, and that is, okay, thank you, 3 minutes. I can wrap this up. That is serving on several boards. This treasurer is an ex officio member of several boards, one of which is the retirement system. And the retirement system, as you know, is it's about a $26 billion retirement fund right now, and it's only funded right now at about 62%. Now, I will say, in the legislature this year, and by the way, I keep mentioning the legislature, I've been in the Senate for 16 years. I've been in the state Senate 16 years. My first 8 years, I was on the Finance Committee, and the last 8 years, I was on the Finance Committee with Senator Watson, and the last 8 years, though, I've been the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, which means I set the state budget for the entire state, and one of which is the treasurer's office. I've met with every agency head, and one of the big things was the retirement system. I have to deal with their budget. And I will say that this year, In our budget, we added $62 million to go into the retirement system. And that actually, there was a big change there, and it hasn't gotten much press. It just really baffles me why they hadn't talked about this more. We'd always been on an 80% funding target for PERS. And with this new $62 million that's coming out of the general fund, and actually another $38 million coming out of counties and municipalities, $100 million is going to be added to the retirement system now every year. And the way they came up with that number is because they're on a 100% funding projection. And that is hugely important to the financial condition of the state. It puts us in great financial condition. When bond rating agencies start looking at our condition and decide what they're going to charge us in interest rates, it saves us millions. And that leads me to tell you about, for the last 8 years, since Republicans took over, 8 years ago, took over the legislature. 8 years ago, we had about $90 million in reserves. That's all we had. When I took over as appropriations chairman, I was looking at a budget, had $90 million reserves, had $200 million in one-time money. We were having to steal from all kind of accounts to make the budget balance. 8 years later, after Republicans have been in charge, through disciplined, prudent, conservative budgeting, we right now have well over $400 million in the rainy day fund. And after this next year's budget, it's going to add another $110, $120 million. It'll have over $500 million, the highest amount the rainy day fund has ever had. We also have no one-time money in the budget. So that's been taken care of too. We pay recurring expenses and recurring revenue. So if you take all that into consideration, my CPA background, my experience in the Senate, I think I'm uniquely qualified to be the state treasurer. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jeremy Martin. I am the only candidate for Transportation Commissioner from Eggville, Mississippi. And for those of you who don't know where Eggville is, if you know where Tupelo is, that's our biggest suburb. We're quite proud of Tupelo. Now, I'm really excited about being on the Hill Country Network because the logo is a rooster. And so I feel very much at home there, being from Eggville. I am currently Assistant Secretary of State. I'm very proud to be the husband of Vanita, and we've got our daughter home from college this weekend. This is the first political speech that she's got to hear me give, so glad to have you back home again. I am blessed to be out campaigning every day and meeting wonderful people in the northern 33 counties of the state. I am a graduate of Moorville High School, Etowamba Community College, and the two most expensive pieces of paper that hang on my wall came from the University of Mississippi. Thank you. Not opposed to shameless plugs, Michael. It is a unique time in Mississippi's history because we stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us, and economically we're in the best condition that we've ever been. And I would be remiss to be standing here tonight in New Albany, Mississippi, in Union County, and not mention the 1987 highway bill, because this is the town where all of that got started, with mayoral leadership that led to legislative leadership and civic leaders coming alongside, working in all 82 counties to raise support for an idea that at that time seemed so far-fetched nobody could ever envision it happening. 4-lane highways crisscrossing North Mississippi. Most people forget that in 1987, there was one completed 4-lane highway in the whole northern part of the state, and that was Interstate 55. 78 stopped at Holly Springs, 45 stopped at Saltillo. And Highway 6 and 72 and 82 were 2-lane roads that no one could have imagined would be 4-lane highways today. Now, 32 years later, we have a second interstate highway, and the first one in the history of Northeast Mississippi. And we have high-paying jobs that have changed the upward mobility of our families forever in this region. But I stand here today to say it's time to renew that commitment 32 years later. It's time for us to build a coalition of stakeholders again and take that movement statewide and identify and secure a long-term funding source just for infrastructure at all levels. Because I would argue that if we paved every state highway with gold, it would do very little good if the culverts were out on the county roads and you couldn't get to it. And so it's time for us to look at that whole tax mechanism. I would assume that everyone in here that's a landowner has seen your millage rates go up in the last few years. So it's time for us to begin to look at a long-term infrastructure bill once again, like we did in 1987, and I commit to you today to do just that. I was in Jackson last week, and I had a gentleman come up to me after my speech, and he patted me on the back, and he said, "I wish you the best of luck getting that funding source done for the 4th District." And I said, "Well, I'm grateful that we only have 3 districts, but if there was a 4th district, it would be my part of the state in North Mississippi." It's time for us to commit not just to maintaining the billions of dollars of infrastructure that we've built since 1987, but also look at opportunities, both from a public safety perspective and an economic development perspective, to make this region a better place, a safer place, and a more competitive region of the state. And as we see neighboring states doing just that, the pressure's on for Mississippi to step up to the plate and do likewise. Now, some of you may be asking yourself, I thought you had worked for Delbert Hosemann for the last 11 years, and I have. And if you've done that, surely you're a conservative. And the answer to that question is yes, I'm a conservative. It is conservative to put a new roof on your house when it starts leaking. And when infrastructure starts crumbling, the conservative answer to that problem is to invest in tangible infrastructure that will take your people to the next level. And that's exactly what we need to do as a state as a whole. That's what we need to do in North Mississippi. And I'm committed to doing that. With Secretary Hosemann, we faced some challenges that folks said we could not overcome. One of them had something to do with showing an ID card when you went to vote. And for a generation, we were told that Mississippi could never pass federal muster, state muster, and get that legislation passed and that law enacted without lawsuits and pandemonium in the streets and cries of intimidation. But through hard work and coalition building, we made that happen. It wasn't a Delbert Hosemann victory. It wasn't a Secretary of State victory. It was a victory for the entire state of Mississippi. And because of that, we should all be proud. 1,600 precincts around the state of Mississippi, numerous poll workers in each precinct, and not one cry of foul, not one cry of intimidation came from the last 5 years of elections. That's a Mississippi victory. And that's thinking long-term, leadership that's visionary. And that's exactly what I want. For those who say we don't need to build new roads, I would beg them to come to New Albany. Because today, I was north of the railroad tracks where a train was parked across every major intersection to the south part of town, and I thought to myself, if a fire were to happen in one of the numerous factories on the north part of town, if there was a child in danger at the elementary school, how long would it take emergency crews to get here with a train blocking every major intersection in town? Now, we all know why that problem hasn't been resolved. It's an expensive solution. A bridge over the railroad tracks at the Glenfield exit that would lead over to the Barclay Boulevard back here that would connect the town around the railroad tracks. But my question to you would be, how expensive is a human life? And how long are we going to continue to kick that can? So I'm committed to you to try to find solutions. I can't promise overnight solutions, but I can promise you that I will listen to your concerns. Secondly, I learned from the best when it comes to accountability. And we desperately need accountability in every state agency, not just the Mississippi Department of Transportation. After I qualified to run for office, I heard a story from a supervisor, a retired supervisor, who said that one day one of his workers came out to the truck and all the shovels had been stolen out of the back of the truck. And the gentleman called and said, "What am I to do?" And he said, "Well, today I guess you're going to have to lean on each other instead of those shovels until I can get you some new ones." Now that's the perception within the agency. Imagine what the perception is outside of the agency. And yet, over the last 3 months during torrential rains in North Mississippi, I've seen MDOT employees being passed at 70 miles an hour by 18-wheelers putting out cones and barrels on our highways and rain slickers, risking their life to protect ours. And it's time that those employees have a champion to come alongside them to help promote them. Those who are dedicated state employees that are risking their lives deserve to have a champion standing beside them. And so as the next Transportation Commissioner, I will be in and out of these maintenance shops. I'll be in and out of these engineering offices. I want to know my employees by name, and I want to give them the tools to do their job well. And finally, accessibility. My whole job for the last 11 years has been to ensure that North Mississippians receive the same level of service from state government as folks in the southern two-thirds of the state. I opened an office in Tupelo for Delbert in 2008 and one in DeSoto County and Hernando in 2009. It's time that every citizen in the state, every supervisor, every municipal leader has a phone number at MDOT where they know a human being is going to answer the phone, and in a timely, appropriate manner, they're going to hear from someone that can actually address the problems they've raised in that phone conversation. Today, it's not the case. I promise you that culture change is not easy, but I will start on day one to work to ensure that the culture at MDOT becomes more accessible, and it'll start with me. You're going to see me in and out of New Albany and Ripley and communities all around North Mississippi. Now, in conclusion, why am I running for Transportation Commissioner? I have argued that the lives of our families and our friends and our neighbors are too important not to take a stab at fixing this problem. And that's why I'm running. I think it's time that North Mississippi have a champion that doesn't apologize for this part of the state, but fights every day to ensure that North Mississippi gets its fair share when it comes to transportation infrastructure. I've done it for the last 11 years. I'm committed to do it for as long as you'll have me as Transportation Commissioner. It is time we hire one of us to work for all of us, and I want to be your next Transportation Commissioner. Thank you all so much.
Well, good evening. I'm the last speaker, so I'll try to be brief. I'm going to beat that 10-minute mark. If it's any indication, you saw Buck up here. Buck had a coat and tie on. Jeremy has a coat on, and I have nothing on. So my 6-year-old got a little upset with me leaving yesterday, and I ran out of the house to hide from her and forgot my jacket. So I apologize for that. If my face is a little shiny, my good buddy back there, Russ, had a little flat tire on the way here today. So we got a little sweaty out there, and it's something about it. Last time I was coming to Oxford, as you'll recall, had a flat tire, and we changed it in less than 20 minutes. Today it was less than 18 minutes, Miss Nancy, so I'm getting better. Listen, you need a Secretary of State that can change a tire in under 18 minutes, okay? That's important. That's an important piece. I'm glad to be here. We spent the morning here and really visited around and love coming up to North Mississippi. I did go to the flagship university, University of Mississippi, Buck, where you had 3 hours. So, hey, no offense to my friends out there in Hill Country, but State's a fine school, a fine school. But I spent there 7 years, 2 degrees. It was undergrad and law school. Now, if I'd have been smart enough, I'd have stayed 7 years just for 1 degree. But I didn't figure that out in time. But Ms. Sue can attest to our morning. I told Russ on the way to lunch, I think we campaigned about 6 months worth this morning. So we were all over the place, and it was a good day. Happy to be here. So Ms. Susan, where'd she go? That prayer earlier, I'm telling you, the only way we turn our country around is with God's guidance. So I absolutely agree with you. It's important that we let godly men and godly women to lead our country. So thank you for that prayer. Buck, enjoyed that singing. I did hear you over there. That was fine tune, and it may be because he got knocked out. I don't know, but he's always good to be around. Buck and I have been in the legislature, as he mentioned. I'm a third-term state senator, so 12 years in the legislature, and Buck's been a great friend. He's a good man, so always good to be with Buck. I appreciate you being here. To the Republican women, thank you. How many Republican women do we have? I saw good, all the hands. Listen, human trafficking is a huge issue. Thank God we were able to get some legislation done this year. We got human trafficking stickers over here, by the way. Get on to those. But about 3 or 4 years ago, and I'll get to Secretary of State, I'm sorry. About 3 or 4 years ago, I got a call from my aunt, actually, and she said, Michael, are you aware of human trafficking in Mississippi? I said, no, that's in L.A., that's in D.C., it's in New York. And she said, no, that's in Mississippi. So we spent some diligent time studying the issue and making sure we got some good legislation in play and started working on that issue. And were it not for the Republican women, thank you all for getting involved. You brought your hammers to the Capitol, not literally, but I appreciate your pressure in making the legislature move on that issue. So I I really appreciate your leadership. And then so you mentioned earlier, Michael's just running. I thought she was playing off my commercial. So my first commercial is called I'm Running. And it's going on the air this week, so you will see it. And look out for that. It's got my 3 little girls in it. I'm from Jackson County originally. My daddy's a pastor. I'm a politician, and I'm a lawyer. So if you don't listen to anything else I say, I understand why. Those are 3 bad combinations. 3 little girls, Gracie Pierce, Annie, and Cora Beth, and we have a good time. A female cat, so I'm in trouble at home, and I've learned to say yes, ma'am, quite a bit. So people say, Michael, why in the world are you running for Secretary of State? About 3 years ago, I sat down with Governor Bryant, and I said, Governor, you know, 3 years and 3 terms in the state legislature is plenty. I can just go home, or you know, maybe go home and just be a dad and be an attorney and make money and be just fine being a dad. It'd be good. And he said, Michael, have you ever thought about Secretary of State's office? And I said, no, sir, I haven't. But what I'll tell you is, you know, I've always kind of had in my mind, if there's an opportunity that presents itself where I can do more good than I can in the state Senate, I'll take a look. And so he said, listen, you're an attorney, you're a small business owner, you've done election law and other issues under the umbrella of the office in the legislature. I really think you should consider it. I think you'd be a great fit and would do a good job as Secretary of State. And I said, well, Governor, I appreciate that. I'll think about it, and really didn't think much else when we left there, kind of brushed it off. Started thinking more and more and really got to a peace about it. My wife and I talked about it, prayed about it. It felt like it was the right move for us, so that's why we're in the race. That's why I'm running. So in the office itself, and I appreciate Buck kind of explaining the Treasurer's office, it's important that you know what state government does. Therefore, you can hold us accountable. And I appreciate you being here tonight, being engaged. That's important. Don't listen just to what we say. Once we get elected, you hold us accountable. And when you see me back up here in Jeff's restaurant eating lunch, and I do something I told you I wouldn't do, then come kick me in the shin. It's important that you do hold us accountable. So I appreciate y'all being here. But the office is large. Touches a lot of things. Elections is kind of the face of the office. You got business services, so your LLCs, your nonprofits, your corporations, cemeteries, sports agents, the list goes on and on and on. Public lands, so you've got tidelands, you've got 16th section land, and you've got forfeited properties. Lots of other things under the umbrella, but it's a big office. Point being, it's important that we have a conservative in that office. It impacts your lives every single day. And we talked a little bit about the platform earlier. What's important is not that you just hear somebody say they're a conservative, but you go look at my voting record. I've got 12 years of conservative votes in the state legislature. That's important. I don't just come here and tell you I'm a conservative. I've proved it. So I want you to go take a look at those records and understand Michael's a conservative, not just in word, but in action as well. So that's important for the office. So 3 big pieces I mentioned to you earlier. 2 I'll talk about really quickly, and I'll sit down and be quiet. The election side, as Jeremy mentioned, voter ID has been a huge success in Mississippi. You know, turning back a lot of confidence to our elections. I remember those debates. Buck and I were on the Senate floor when that came through, and was very proud to support that and get that out of the legislature. Secretary Husband did a fantastic job. The only state not to get sued by the federal government. Incredible. And to his credit, you know, understanding the legislative issues, understanding the Constitution, understanding the federal interaction, and making that thing go seamlessly was absolutely outstanding. And it was a team effort. Your whole office was involved, Jeremy, so thank you for your work on that. So voter ID is great, and the foundation has been built on that. So what we have seen is kind of some of the, you take a step back in the registration piece. If you've watched the news the last 6 to 8 months, what you've seen is a lot of illegal immigrants have shown up on voting rolls. That's a problem. So what we want to do is take a look at that. It's a very important piece for us. Looked at what several other states have done. Kansas went way too far, got sued by the federal government, much like Secretary Husband did in researching and understanding what's legal, what's not. We looked at what some other states have done. Tennessee is probably the best one that we've seen. And what they do is, once you register to vote, you can pull that registration information, screen it through some databases. If a flag pops up that says this person may not be a citizen, you can pull them in the office, ask them to show proof of citizenship. If they can't prove they're a United States citizen, they should not be voting in our elections. That's an important piece. 3 seconds or 3 minutes? Well, we don't want 3 of them voting at all. So appreciate that heads up. But that's an important piece. We saw some research the other day that said there are 160,000 registered voters that aren't living at the address at which they registered. Now, they could be dead. They could have moved out of state. They could have moved in their own district. They could have moved to another district. So it's important that we work on those voter rolls. It's important that we work on the registration piece, a big piece of that office. And we're going to study that hard and do some good things. The second piece is, and I'll try to sum it up real quick, the business services is a large component of that office. And so about 2 years ago, we passed some legislation dealing with occupational licensing review. Very important piece, and I'll tell the story real quick. Melanie Armstrong, Melanie's from Tupelo. Melanie opened up this shop where she could braid hair. Doing really good. the business was great. The Board of Cosmetology comes in and says, you can't do this. You can't braid hair without a license. Melanie had to go get 300 hours of class and to get a license in wigology. Anybody know what wigology is? Well, she's got a license in it. So Melanie does it. She's doing great. Business is going well. She says, you know what? I'm an entrepreneur. I can do good for my family. I'm going to hire people, grow my business, make more money, do good things. Board of Cosmetology comes back and says, you can't teach people to braid hair without a license. 1,200 hours of class to get a license and teach people to braid hair. Are you kidding me? Those are the roadblocks. Those are the speed bumps to get in front of our entrepreneurs in Mississippi that hurt small businesses. Well, thank God she was bold enough to challenge that. Out of that challenge came this legislation. Out of that legislation came something that's called the Occupational Licensing Review Commission. Michael, why is that important? The Secretary of State has a seat on that commission. The really cool thing is once these new regulations and rules come out, they now have to go to that commission. And if they're overburdensome, overbroad for small businesses, that commission can strike those down. Let me tell you something. That is an extremely important piece of that office because small businesses are the backbone of our economy. So if we can protect them from overburdensome, overreaching government, dear God, we need a conservative. And I'm going to be that man. So I am Michael Watson. I'm from Jackson County, Mississippi, and I need your vote for Secretary of State. Thank you much.